The leadership of the WNBA is currently in a state of total institutional collapse, and the cracks have been spreading a lot longer than anyone in the league office wants to admit. Reports throughout 2025 made it clear that the relationship between Commissioner Cathy Engelbert and the players was eroding. But what this leaked internal memo suggests is that her departure from the job is not some clean, orderly transition at the end of a successful run. It looks, feels, and reads like a forced exit built on mutual distrust, legal firewalls, and a front office terrified of what might come out if the wrong details about player safety and the CBA standoff ever see the light of day. According to multiple reports in late 2025, the league was already pushing back against the idea that Engelbert would resign after the CBA negotiations, calling those rumors categorically false, even as anonymous insiders described her eventual exit as relationship-driven. That phrase, relationship-driven, now hits differently when you read through this memo and see references to irreparable trust, ongoing exposure related to past and future litigation, and indemnity language that would effectively bubble wrap the commissioner from personal liability. This is not how someone walks away from a job on universally celebrated terms. This is how you stage a controlled demolition of a tenure that has become politically toxic with players, strained with owners, and radioactive in the court of public opinion. To understand why this document matters, you have to start with the players' side of the story. Throughout 2025, the WNBA's stars went public with their frustration at the league's leadership, and that frustration was aimed directly at Engelbert. Minnesota Lynx star Napheesa Collier didn't just criticize officiating or travel or scheduling in her now famous exit interview, she labeled the WNBA's leadership the worst in the world and painted a picture of a commissioner who had failed to build genuine relationships with the very players driving the league's growth. That criticism wasn't some isolated rant. ESPN's reporting detailed a pattern. Players felt like activism in the bubble had to be forced through over league reluctance, like discussions about health, safety, and long-term investment always came second to business optics and talking points prepared for sponsors. Former union leaders described having to push the league to embrace player-driven initiatives rather than feeling supported in real time. And over time, the language players used to describe the relationship with Engelbert shifted from needs improvement to something closer to broken beyond repair. On the other side, owners and executives had their own doubts. Engelbert came into the league from Deloitte, helped secure an 11-year media rights deal, oversaw expansion to new markets, and presided over a period of rising attendance, valuations, and visibility. But as the CBA clock ticked toward an October 31st, 2025 deadline, reporting suggested that ownership circles were split on her ability to navigate the growing standoff with players, manage public criticism, and keep the league's newfound momentum from turning into a PR disaster. That combination, players losing trust and insiders second-guessing leadership, is exactly the environment where a memo like this becomes both necessary and dangerous. Here is where the leaked document changes the stakes. On the surface, it reads like a framework for Engelbert's eventual exit from the commissioner role, laying out timelines, communication strategies, and high-level talking points about honoring her contributions and centering the league's long-term vision. But buried in the later pages, especially the final 3, is language around indemnification that jumps off the page, a demand that the league provide full legal protection for the commissioner against any claims arising from historic or prospective disputes relating to player safety, working conditions, or the implementation and enforcement of the CBA. Think about what that implies. The WNBA has spent the past several seasons fighting criticism on travel, back-to-back scheduling, medical infrastructure, and how it has responded to injuries and officiating controversies in high-stakes games. At the same time, players have made it clear that they see the looming CBA as a once-in-a-generation chance to reset the terms of their employment, from salaries and revenue sharing to the baseline standard for what professional should look like in a global league. If Engelbert is insisting, in writing, on being shielded from lawsuits or grievances tied to those very issues, she is effectively acknowledging that the decisions made on her watch could become evidence in tomorrow's court filings or arbitration hearings. The memo uses the corporate language you would expect, phrases like risk mitigation, legacy protection, and closing out the commissioner file with no exposure. But the subtext is blunt. The commissioner does not want to be left holding the bag if, a year or two from now, a wave of legal actions or union challenges argue that the league failed to meet its duty of care to players during her tenure. That's why those last 3 pages matter so much in this story. They move the narrative from "is she leaving" to "what exactly is she afraid will surface when she does?" To connect that back to the 2025 CBA fight, remember the context. The collective bargaining agreement was set to expire on October 31st, with both sides publicly talking about a transformational deal, but privately acknowledging that they were still far apart on the biggest issues. Players wanted substantial raises, revenue-sharing structures that reflected the league's growth, and structural improvements that would make the day-to-day reality of being a WNBA player feel less like a grind and more like a top-tier professional job. Owners and the league office, meanwhile, were worried about cost, timing, and the logistics of expansion, with new teams like the Portland Fire and Toronto Tempo entering the picture. Multiple reports framed the situation as being on the edge of a lockout or some kind of work stoppage, something the WNBA has never experienced, which players were increasingly willing to discuss out loud. Guard Sophie Cunningham warned that players might refuse to play until they get what they deserve, calling a potential lockout a real possibility, even as the league boasted about historic momentum. When you combine that level of brinksmanship with the existing distrust towards Engelbert, the idea of a forced exit after the CBA dust settled stops sounding like a conspiracy theory and starts sounding like the logical next chapter. Now, layer on top of that the way the league responded publicly to stories about Engelbert's future. When SBJ and other outlets reported that she could resign after the CBA negotiations, league spokespeople slammed those stories as categorically false, stressing that she had no intention of stepping down. At the same time, those same reports noted that sources close to the situation believed her eventual exit would be driven by strained relationships with players, with colleagues, and with stakeholders across the WNBA and NBA ecosystem. In other words, the league was publicly insisting she was not going anywhere while privately sketching out exactly how and when she would be gone and under what legal protections. For the players, this only confirms what they were already feeling. When a star like Collier calls out league leadership in such stark terms, and when players from union leadership circles talk about feeling talked down to or treated as if they should be grateful instead of treated as partners, every closed-door memo about indemnity becomes another data point in a larger story. They see a commissioner who spent public appearances highlighting her own role in media deals and expansion, while they felt their sacrifices, activism, and year-round grind were being minimized or repackaged as part of someone else's success story. A quiet, negotiated exit with heavy legal padding doesn't repair that resentment, it cements it. From the owner's side, it's more complicated. Many of them benefited directly from the media rights deal, the expansion process, and the overall visibility during Engelbert's term. ESPN's reporting on league insiders showed that some still believed she was the right person to shepherd the business forward, while others questioned whether the ongoing drama around officiating, player relations, and public criticism had become too large a distraction. A memo that lays out a way to thank her, protect her legally, and pivot to a new face of leadership offers a compromise. You keep the gains, you manage the risk, and you try to reset the narrative before the next CBA cycle or any major legal collisions. The question, of course, is what the league is trying to bury, or at least bury under layers of legal language and PR statements about moving forward. Player safety is not just about whether someone gets hurt on the court. It is about everything that surrounds their job. That includes how travel is handled when back-to-back stack up, how medical decisions are made when injuries happen under controversial circumstances, and how much autonomy players have when they raise concerns about conditions that affect their bodies and their livelihoods. In a league that has already taken heat for officiating issues in big playoff moments, for limited charter travel, and for players feeling unheard, it is not hard to imagine how those facts could be pieced together in a future legal fight over negligence, workplace safety, or bad faith bargaining. That is why the wording of the indemnity section is such a red flag. It is not just about protecting Engelbert from some hypothetical one-off lawsuit. It's about insulating her from an entire era of decisions and strategies that players have publicly labeled harmful, dismissive, or exploitative. When a commissioner asks for that kind of protection as a condition of stepping aside, you are no longer talking about a neutral resignation. You are talking about an exit wrapped around a fear of what might be uncovered or how existing grievances might be reinterpreted once she no longer sits at the center of the WNBA's power structure. The irony is that a moment like this could have been an opportunity. Imagine a scenario where the league, the players, and the commissioner all stood together at a podium and said, "This relationship has been hard. We've made mistakes on all sides, and we're choosing a new chapter with transparency and accountability." Instead, what the leaked memo reveals is a closed-door strategy session focused on liability, messaging, and controlling the fallout, rather than truth-telling or reconciliation. So where does this leave the WNBA now? The league is still pushing into new markets, still chasing bigger deals, still riding a wave of attention that should be a launchpad, not a landmine. But every expansion draft, every CBA clause, and every renewed debate about player treatment will now unfold under the shadow of this memo and what it implies about the last era of leadership. The players have already signaled that they are willing to withhold their labor if they are not heard. The question is whether the next commissioner inherits a landscape where trust is even possible, or whether Engelbert's exit, engineered behind closed doors, wrapped in legal armor, locks in a legacy of suspicion that will take years to undo. Because ultimately, the most important part of those final 3 pages isn't the legal jargon. It's what that jargon admits without saying out loud. It admits that the relationship between the commissioner and the players is not just strained, but fundamentally broken, to the point where everyone involved expects the past few years to be litigated in the court of law, the court of public opinion, or both. And once that expectation is baked into the exit plan, it is hard to pretend this is anything but what the players have been calling it for months: a leadership crisis born out of neglect, mishandled power, and an irreparable rift at the heart of the WNBA.